When somebody asks how old the Great Pyramid is, they're usually looking for a date, and oftentimes they get it. The standard answer is pretty straightforward. The Great Pyramid was constructed about 4,500 years ago in the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom as a tomb for the Pharaoh Khufu. Sounds solid, pretty convincing. That's usually the end of the conversation. But here's the problem. When it comes to the pyramids, when is not a standalone question. Because when you ask when, you are forced to ask how. And when you ask how, you can't help but ask why. I'm Evan Flay, and this is Fire and Stone. Now, a structure doesn't exist at a point in time. It exists at a point in capability. The Great Pyramid weighs 6 million tons, with a precision Egypt never matches again. It appears suddenly, peaks almost immediately, and fades, all within a single dynasty. So if we're saying it's 4,500 years old, and I'm not arguing otherwise, we also kind of have to explain, why does Egypt's most extreme stone architecture surge all at once and then vanish? Why does the engineering decline over time, not improve? Why does the knowledge persist, but the execution disappear? These aren't fringe questions. They're pretty basic. And until we're ready to slow down and talk like adults, 4,500 years doesn't really explain much at all. I mean, imagine asking how old a Formula One car is, and then assuming that tells you everything you need to know about how it was built, why it performs the way that it does, and why an average person could not replicate that. That's exactly what we do with the pyramids. We take one of humanity's most extreme engineering feats and reduce it to a date on a timeline. Once it's assigned to a dynasty and a century, it feels solved. The problem is simple. Age does not explain capability. A date might tell us when the stones were stacked, but not how a civilization stacked them like that, or why that capability surges suddenly and then vanishes. Here's what gets glossed over. The Great Pyramid isn't just old, it's enormous. There's upwards of 2.3 million blocks that comprise it, and the base is leveled to within centimeters over a 13-acre plot. And it's precise. It's aligned to true north within 3 arc minutes. And most importantly, it's completely unrepresentative of what came before or after. In most human progress, you expect a curve. Rough attempts early, steady improvements, and then, mastery at the end. But not here. Egypt's boldest stone architecture arrives nearly fully formed, hits its peak, and declines, all while civilization just kind of hums along. There's no dark age, no collapse, no invasion, just worse pyramids. So why does the most advanced example appear first, not last? To understand, we're going to have to take a look at what Egypt knew before the 4th dynasty, and why that knowledge seemingly converged into something extraordinary rather than evolving gradually. One of the most common reactions when questioning the pyramids is the assumption that something must have appeared out of nowhere, like alien technology or forbidden knowledge or vanished civilizations. Listen, there is a non-zero chance that it's one of those 3 things. And no one would love that more than me. But it does sort of miss the mark. By the 4th dynasty, Egypt wasn't a primitive society fumbling into stone architecture. This isn't guesswork. It's grounded in what predates Giza. Take the 3rd dynasty's step pyramid at Saqqara, a massive planned stone complex demanding surveying, organization, and coordination. It proves Egypt already mastered quarrying and shaping and mobilizing stone for enormous projects. We may not fully understand or comprehend every technique or method, But the concept of monumental stone building was not new to Egypt at that time. More crucially, Egypt had a worldview fusing geometry and cosmic order and kingship and the stars, all transmitted through ritual and practice, not written manuals. Enter Imhotep, a real Third Dynasty figure who embodies this sort of priestly technical blend. As Djoser's vizier, chief architect, high priest of Ra at Heliopolis, and overseer of sculptors, he wasn't some mythical genius, but a polymath, integrating astronomy to align structures with celestial bodies and mathematics for things like geometric ratios and structural stability. His step pyramid evolved a simple mastaba into a six-tiered marvel of cut limestone with underground galleries that stretched over 5 kilometers. It wasn't just building, it was symbolic engineering, precise dimensions and alignments that could produce natural resonances and low frequencies in stone chambers. Imhotep represented the blueprint, defining what was thinkable through ritual geometry and cosmic insight. You see, Egypt remembered achievements, not blueprints. That's why Imhotep's legend grew centuries later. So by the Fourth Dynasty, Egypt wasn't asking, can we build this? That door was already open. The question became, how far can we push it? By the time Khufu comes to the throne, Egypt is not guessing anymore. He inherits a system that has already been tested. Under Sneferu, Egypt doesn't just build pyramids. It breaks them and corrects them and rebuilds them. His first pyramid at Maidum fails relatively quickly. His second, the bent pyramid, has to be altered mid-construction. But his third, the red pyramid, finally clicks. That sequence matters. It tells us that by the end of Sneferu's reign, Egypt has done something rare in history. It has started to learn where the limits are. What changed under Khufu was not knowledge, it was execution. And execution, historically, is never abstract. It always has a name. And in this case, that name is Hemiunu. Not a priest philosopher or mythic inventor of geometry, Hemiunu was the elite administrator and effectively the architect of Khufu's Great Pyramid, though Egypt didn't use that exact term. Born into the royal bloodline as the son of Prince Nefermat, a vizier and artist under Sneferu, and grandson of Sneferu himself, Hemiunu was Khufu's nephew, granting him unparalleled access to the family's accumulated wisdom and resources. This wasn't distant heritage. The priestly technical tradition from Imhotep's era, refined through Third Dynasty innovations in astronomy and mathematics and symbolic design, likely flowed directly into the Fourth Dynasty. Sneferu, whose reign overlapped with Imhotep's later years, may have drawn on that expertise through advisors, embedding it in the royal court. And Hemiunu, in turn, would have inherited this blueprint of cosmic precisions with things like alignments to stars and geometric ratios for stability and resonant chamber designs that could amplify natural frequencies in stone. But Hemiunu elevated it through execution. He held multiple top-tier titles simultaneously. He was hereditary prince, vizier, overseer of all the king's works, chief justice, greatest of the 5 in the house of Thoth, and royal seal bearer. He commanded surveying and labor mobilization, logistics, and material flows on an unprecedented scale. He was royal adjacent rather than just a bureaucratic outsider. He wasn't just managing, he was innovating techniques in quarrying and transporting massive blocks and coordinating thousands of people, methods that still puzzle us today. Hemiunu fused Imhotep's visionary precision with the hard lessons learned under Sneferu's experimental pyramids, knowledge refined through things like failure and correction and constraint, and pushed it to the absolute limit, turning ritual blueprints into a flawless megastructure. And yet, he vanishes right after Khufu's reign. No manuals, no successors, no repeat performances. This reveals the Great Pyramid as a rare convergence, not supernatural or mystical or extraterrestrial. Once that alignment dissolved, once the unparalleled executor was gone, the feat could not repeat. Which brings us back to age. Because if the Great Pyramid were simply the result of gradual improvement, we would expect to see later pyramids be built larger, more precise, more ambitious. But the reality is the exact opposite, which means that the Great Pyramid sits not at the beginning of Egyptian capability, but at the peak of it. Almost immediately after Khufu, the trajectory bends. Djedefre, Khufu's successor, doesn't build at Giza at all. He builds at Abu Rawash, several kilometers north. Today, Abu Rawash is rubble. Not weathered or worn down, but outright rubble. Whatever the reasons, later stone robbing or political disruption or structural choices, the contrast is stark. The Great Pyramid endures. Djedefre's monument does not. Then comes the Giza sequence most people know. Khafra builds big, but the pattern is already shifting towards slightly less precision and ambition. Menkare's pyramid is smaller again. It's as if Egypt is kind of stepping down from the ledge. And with Shepseskef, the final ruler of the Fourth Dynasty, the point becomes unavoidable. He doesn't build a pyramid at all. He builds a mastaba. That isn't technological amnesia, it's a decision. By the end of the Fourth Dynasty, Egypt still knows how to quarry, move, and cut stone, how to align monuments, how to perform the rituals and preserve the symbolism. Nothing fundamental has been forgotten. What has disappeared is the confidence and the capacity to attempt that scale again. From the Fifth Dynasty onward, pyramid construction continues and goes as far as the Sixth Dynasty. But these structures are profoundly different. Smaller, with mud brick cores instead of solid limestone and granite blocks, less precise and increasingly symbolic rather than structural. And this is where the experience of the Great Pyramid likely matters. Modern visitors repeatedly report that the structure does not feel inert. Inside, sound behaves unusually. Low frequency resonance is detectable. Standing waves and vibrations can be felt in certain chambers, and prolonged silence produces somatic sensations. These are the physical effects of large, precisely shaped stone chambers, not mystical claims. But imagine encountering that 4,500 years ago. It is plausible that the pyramid's experiential impact exceeded expectations and that this fed later religious interpretation, amplifying the sacred status of what had been built. This also helps explain why figures like Imhotep grew in stature much later, right? Not because new knowledge suddenly appeared, but because later generations are trying to explain a result that they can no longer reproduce. Which brings us back one last time to age. When people ask how old is the Great Pyramid, they usually want a date. The reality is that it was almost certainly constructed roughly 4,500 years ago during the Old Kingdom's Fourth Dynasty between 2580 and 2560 BC. But the more revealing answer is this. The Great Pyramid represents a brief, unstable window of capability, not a long, steady climb. The knowledge didn't disappear. The combination did. And when it did, the Great Pyramid stopped being a plan and started being a benchmark. Because the real question was never just how old is it, but when were humans capable of doing something like that at all? And in the next episode, we're going to be looking at just that. How did they do this? How did they build this? How could they have possibly have built this? And it's likely going to force us to question everything we thought we knew, maybe even some of the stuff that we were so confident of in this episode. But the one thing that's for certain is that the answer is probably going to be a little bit more tricky to pin down than just a date. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Evan Flay, and this is Fire and Stone.